musical.
Ooh, by Tim Minchin. I'll talk about that a little bit in our behind the scenes of that about the musical. But yeah, you can check that out just by paying $5 a month. Um, if you want to be a horror buff for $10 a month, so cheaper than a quarter tank of gas, you can get our episode on the witches, which is also a Roald Dahl, based off a Roald Dahl novel.
It should
So
we like it's almost like we did it on purpose. If we did, it
we
was all
did.
kings and brilliance.
Yes. It's almost like Pace integrates to a five when planning sometimes and
Hmm.
has copious amounts of spreadsheets. So I planned this stuff.
Love a good spreadsheet here at
Hmm.
Horror Nerds at Church. If you are listening to this episode on your favorite podcatcher, check the show notes for any content warnings for this episode, links to all the books we mentioned on our bookshop.org store, and for everyone watching or listening, check the show notes for links to our newsletter, merch store, and Patreon. So, y'all, this is the first live episode since the inauguration,
Hmm.
or I guess I should say, since MLK Day was so very, very defamed. Um, how you doing?
I
I
am
was like,
the meme of the dog in the burning house that says it's fine.
everything's fine. Yeah. I was wearing this shirt today that our like in-person people can kind of see. Um, the bottom just says "Have a nice day," and to accompany somebody to physical therapy. And one of the other physical therapists saw my shirt and just thought of the bag and was like, "Oh, cute," and then saw what it said and was like, "I love your shirt." Like I saw it and I
Oh,
was like, "Oh, cute," and then I saw it like what it says and I was like, "Yes."
I love
So
it.
we definitely on this podcast vote for abolishing ICE.
Agreed, agreed. I am impressed that a church with which I am working or have worked or will work or something. I don't want to give too much details over air, but I'm impressed that a church with which I have a professional relationship at some point in the past or future um, has responded very positively to my suggestion about doing trainings as a staff on how to disrupt ice raids and stuff like that our
Nice.
within that context. So I'm very happy about that. That's not something that sadly most Lutheran churches would do because they only like to pretend to be progressive until it's actually time to show up and be progressive. But yeah, I'm hanging in there. It's been a long week.
Yeah, yeah, agreed.
Yeah. I also had a serious conversation with my boss today about just so you know, come our youth trip in November, I might not be able to ride on a plane, so we'll have to come with alternate transportation for Pace if you want Pace to go.
Hmm. Which it might be
'Cause
that everybody doesn't ride on a plane.
possibly that is something that has come up, but we'll see. What about you, Susanna? How have you been?
Well,
Um, I am just wondering where I belong in this world right now. Like, like I'm having some problems with the board that shall not be named, and it's just like, why? I mean, I really must be a person of faith because why am I still in this church, right? Like, why am I still doing this to myself? But like, I really believe, like, after being when I was a lobbyist way back when, like, there were so many people who wanted to do the right thing, who knew that queer policy needed to be taken. and protected. And then, but they couldn't because there were so many religious people in the way. And the most we could do is ask them to put things in a drawer. And there will be no drawer under the Trump regime. So it's really important. And I remember it was really important that we have religious people saying protect trans people, protect queer people, protect
Mhm.
people of color. And so I know that the work that I need to do is here in a faith community in terms of organizing and online stuff and calls. But this church makes it so hard to work for them.
Hmm.
And
Yep.
it's grating on me.
Yep. It definitely has affected my discernment process of what
Yeah, I bet.
candidacy may be. So we'll see.
Yeah, I bet. So, like, yeah, in that in between of where do I, as a queer person of faith, who used to be a political organizer,
Hmm.
like, where does that put me? And because between when I was an organizer and where who I am now, the church has done such a job on my confidence and my imposter syndrome. It has taken out major pieces of the things that I know I have a record of being good at. But
Hmm.
the more
Mhm.
that they're like this isn't important or you can't possibly be good at this because you're a layperson, the more it gets in there and I just can't. Anyway, so yeah, that's it's imposter syndrome. Where do I fit in? And Matt is always saying you got to go bigger. You just got to go bigger, and
Yeah.
he's always right. And I don't know why.
Hmm.
Anyway, that's enough.
You have
But
good advice, though.
you, Emily,
Mhm.
what about you? What about you, love?
Well, I also agree that you need to go bigger. So,
There's the face.
um, yeah, I am in the middle of a lot of things. Um, and it just like everything just feels overwhelming. I was talking to somebody and he was like, and my therapist reminded me that dissociating is a way of our bodies protecting ourselves. And I never really like felt like I dissociated before until recently. And now I'm like, oh yeah, I'm totally like disengaged with everything in this moment because I can't handle it. So I've been doing a lot more two dots mostly.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
Also though, are you ready for this? I finished Stars Above, the Lunar
Oh,
Chronicles
wow.
book that I have been reading for forever. I still have the two graphic novels, but I haven't gotten one yet. Um, from the library because I had to return it a million times. But I started reading Ink Girls, which is a graphic novel. So I'm excited about that. And I am
Nice.
enjoying having Storygraph and Letterboxd as ways to keep track of the things that I'm watching
Yeah.
um, and reading that's not Amazon centric and stuff.
Yeah. I tried to get into Storygraph. Was not working for me, so I just have a spreadsheet right now, but I'm also off of Goodreads now. I've been for a while. It's just too much.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and it's hard with Goodreads because like publishers still use it a lot.
mhm.
Um, so
Oh,
part of me is
so many
like, I mean, I
kisses.
might stay just to do independent book author like review type things. I don't know. It's hard. It's
Yeah.
complicated.
This is Gandalf, everybody. It's been a while since he's been on live, and he's being very clingy tonight and giving me nonstop kisses, so I don't know what's going on there.
Maybe he knows that you need them.
Yeah. I give myself a daily like dissociation when I get into the office for a good hour, like as a treat to myself, just as a treat.
Yeah.
I haven't been reading much. I said this previously, that the, one of the main ways I read fiction is audiobook, and then nonfiction I tend to read print. And because of news, I have not been in a good mindset to read print, like sit down and read print, because I can like hyper focus into reading, which I love, and that's how I survive as an academic. But like,
Mhm.
my brain is just like refusing to go there right now to
Okay.
concentrate on anything. But audiobook wise, usually I will have it on when I'm going my walks or in the car, stuff like that. And I just have not, I've been re listening to so many podcasts that I have not had much space for audiobooks thus far. So I'm sure I'll read again soon, but right now I'm kind of on a halt.
The
I do,
podcasts are like podcasts, I think, are like magazines.
yeah,
Or the audio version
yeah,
of magazines.
agreed. Or like blogs, stuff like that, similar
Yeah.
vibes. Um, I
Interesting.
have been watching a lot of new stuff. So I watched most recently in theaters Wolfman, directed by Leigh Whannell. It's a remake of the original, well, kind of remake. It's in the ongoing rebooted and remade Wolfman franchise by Universal Pictures. And it was fine plot-wise, but like I mean, there's only so many like werewolf movies that you can do because they're all pretty much the same now. Like that plot's been done overdone so many times. So it's hard to really like do something innovative there. So it just feels like a
Mm.
rehash of the same old story-wise. But as far as like cinematography, Leigh Whannell did this really amazing lighting effect where it would go from the this doesn't spoil the plot any, but it goes from like the people around the werewolf, what they are seeing, like with full color, human eye, everything. But then the camera will spin, and as it spins, the colors and lighting changes, and then you're seeing it
Mm.
through the werewolf's eyes, which is like a dulled, more subdued color with a little bit of night vision. So and it's just like it was a really well done effect, and I think it was done practically. I actually think they like had a light change as the camera was spinning with the lights lighting the set as opposed to doing it in computer
Ooh,
post-production, which is always better,
nice.
I think.
Yeah.
So it was just really done well and seamless. So check out The Wolfman if you want. Um, it's good. I also saw Nosferatu. Well, I talked about this before. I saw a few other horror movies, which I talked about recently.
Hmm.
Beyond that, oh, the other thing I wanted to say is I got the 4K. So y'all know I'm a 4K collector of physical media. Books and film are basically the two collections I maintain. And I just got in the mail the 4K of Jackie Brown, which is a Quentin Tarantino film. I think is underrated. I think it is his I actually think it's his best film. Um, and Pam Grier, just fantastic and actor. And so like,
Absolutely. I agree. Just
right.
yeah, it's so good. So good.
Um, so I watched it yesterday and I just like I every time I watch that movie, it's so good, it's so fun, it's amazing. And it's definitely like so Quentin Tarantino does a lot of homages in his stuff. He's definitely like a cinephile
Recording in progress.
and loves film. And so Jackie Brown is kind of his, and especially starring Pam Grier, is kind of his homage towards Black cinema, particularly uh Black exploitation films, in a way that's not like claiming it as a white person, but just kind of like so like the difference between what's the word I'm looking for? Like appropriation versus like appreciation kind of. So it's definitely like
Mhm.
Quentin Tarantino like really appreciating the genre and the great film actors and directors of that era. And so by him casting Pam Grier as like the perfect casting because she was huge in the black exploitation films. And so it's just awesome to see her in that film. It's just if you haven't seen it, go out and watch it. Like everybody, I feel like, well, not everybody, most people know who Quentin Tarantino is, but surprisingly, not many people have seen Jackie Brown unless they're like hardcore Tarantino films. And then I just feel like that's sad because it's, I think, easily his best movie. Um, that was a lot about that movie. I don't know why. Uh, what about you, Suzanne? Have you been watching, listening to, reading, YouTubing, anything that you want to shout out?
Oh
That
yeah,
lives in
totally,
her
totally,
circle.
totally, totally. Okay, so I just binged 2 seasons of The Rig,
Oh yeah.
and
Oh.
yeah, which is the Amazon Prime, and it's about these drillers, but it's really about
Ooh.
environmental horror, and
It looks really good, and I think we should include it in our future environmental horror season that we haven't
it's
Seasons. We already have more than enough for one.
so
it's
like
a TV show though.
it's a TV show, and there's only 2 seasons. And well, so far, there's no word out on whether it got renewed or not. But it's basically these folks that are out on a rig, and they are drilling for this, typical evil oil company. And there's some things that I really appreciate about it. Like the first is that there's a lot of they come across a bacteria that
Ooh.
is that is all underneath the ocean floor. And so there's a lot of conversation about something you might have seen in like mold spore conversations and mold spore horror. You might have picked this up in
Mhm.
zombies. You know how like mold spores can like communicate over distances as a
Yeah.
colony, and so like this is like an ancient bacteria that is all underneath of the bottom of the ocean. And it brings up a lot of things that I really love that I think are really interesting. Like one, we don't know jack shit about the bottom of the ocean. Like we know more about the
Hmm.
moon than we know about the bottom of the ocean. Um, Two, Lord knows what kind of life is down there. Like we're still finding new things down there,
Hmm.
and they're ancient things that have been around forever. And it talks about the five major extinctions, because I don't want to spoil it, but there is a formation that is made at the bottom of the ocean, and they were able to connect it with the five major extinctions. And the question throughout the 2 seasons is this really a bad entity? Like,
Hmm.
because people can get infected with it. Um,
Hmm.
is it a bad entity? Is it a just entity that is fighting back against the way that we've harmed the earth? Or
Mm.
is it a good entity that regenerates life? Or is it a bad entity that is the cause of those five major extinctions? So it was like, there's definitely a lot of environmental horror in it,
Hmm.
and turns
Hmm.
it on its head, and I think there's a lot of theology in it. It's really good. It's really good from like it's not like
Yeah.
the world's best show, but like the questions it raises are really good. And the reason I started watching it is because the woman who plays, I don't know, like the environmentalist consultant person, she was the one who played Jennifer in 13 Monkeys, and I freaking love that
Hmm.
series. And they, like, the script did not do her justice. She can do a lot more than what she got with the script, but the concept is fantastic because there
Love
are
it.
bacteria that can live for millions and millions and millions of years. And what would that look like if we came across it today? A bacteria that like lived in a colony, had the kind of like spores kind of reproduction, and has been around through all extinctions. So it's really
Mm.
fascinating. I think you
Hmm.
would like it in terms like there's not a whole lot out there about environmental horror that's like other there's stuff like the day after tomorrow where the environment's gonna get cold and everybody's gonna freeze. There's like that, but this is a different thing. This is a
Yeah, yeah.
different, yeah. It's very cool.
Yeah,
Nice.
agreed. I haven't seen it all, but I've seen various episodes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
I love it. Yeah, we
Also, Hitler's Inner Circle is one
oh.
that I have been watching. I had to take a break for like the week of inauguration.
Hmm.
But it's helpful in recognizing the similarities and the ways that
Yeah.
like that inner circle and how the inner circle is specifically designed is very similar um, to what Trump is doing. And so, yeah, it's just fascinating. And
Yeah.
it's giving me like, I don't know. I think there are ways to like play egos off each other to, if nothing else, distract um, them from the harm that they want to commit. Uh, but I don't know. We'll see.
Mhm.
We'll see.
Mhm. Um, the last show that I have been watching is because I can't right now with that stuff, so I need more of a checkout for my watching I do for enjoyment. And so I'm watching Twin Peaks because of
Hmm.
rest in peace, David Lynch and his passing recently, but super queer, fun show. And if you see a lot of my trans colleagues are sharing memes after Trump's inauguration that actually are from Twin Peaks, the fix your heart or die quote that you see all over social media now that a lot of trans people are posting with the trans flag and stuff is a quote from a trans character in Twin Peaks. So
Oh,
it's kind of a way to honor that as well.
nice.
But I stopped watching through it because I watched the pilot and then I was like looking online to see how much it would cost to get a 4K of it, and I realized, or not 4K, a Blu-ray, and I found online that they have a new box set coming out next Tuesday that is the pilot and the movie in 4K, and then the 3 seasons of the TV series, the two original, and then the third season they did a few years ago in one box set. So I'm like, I'm buying that. So I pre-ordered it from Amazon. I know we hate Amazon, but it's one of the sadly, it's one of the few places you can get uh physical film media. Not many places sell it anymore. Um, so yeah, I got that. So I'll continue my watch through Twin Peaks after my box set arrives.
Nice.
It's really good. Susanna's seen Twin Peaks. She can fill you in. It's amazing.
There's no way I can fill anybody in on Twin
And you're
Peaks.
muted if you're talking to us.
There is no way that I can fill anybody in on Twin Peaks. That is just an experience.
Yeah,
And
well,
a girl
Emily will have to
disappears.
experience it. Yeah.
Yeah, in the daylight hours. Emily can't handle that at night. No, no.
Wait, it's scary? Nobody told me
It's
that.
very unsettling, more so than like horror
Oh, that's
scary.
the worst. That's the stuff that I need.
Yeah.
Like Hannibal Lecter kind of unsettling.
Yeah, there's aspects of that to it. And it's
Ooh,
a very theological show. So at one point I would just love to cover the whole series. But it's one of those where like we'd only be able to cover like 2 episodes at a time in a boot tube and like slowly go through the whole series. It's one that you can't do like a season at a time or something. So
yeah.
that'll be down the road one day. Anyway, so none of that is the movie we're watching today, though, or we watched for today, which is
Matilda.
Matilda, 1996, directed and starring Danny DeVito, um,
Mhm. And narrated by.
and narrated by, yes. When was the first time you've seen this movie? And maybe also you can share a little bit about why you picked it for the season.
I picked it because Matilda's a witch and a kid witch, and I love it.
I love it.
And I don't actually know when the first time I saw it was. I think probably in theaters, but it's entirely possible that we got it from Blockbuster back in the day. Rest in peace, Blockbuster. Um, but yeah, I love it. I love Mara Wilson. She is like
Hmm.
my favorite kid actor, I think. Um,
Yeah.
I just love her, and res- I didn't realize how much I resonated with her character.
Yeah,
Oh,
right.
that feels
I
real.
know as
That
a
feels
kid.
real.
Yep.
I love math too. Yeah, yeah. What about you?
I got in trouble for reading as a kid, so like I definitely bonded with her
Mm.
because like I'm not gonna say who, but a few people in my life have would tell me I read too much or get me in trouble or ground me from books and stuff like that. So
That's terrible.
yeah. So like I definitely resonated to her growing up. But this movie came out late enough in my life that like I was 11 when it came out. And I don't think I saw it in theaters, but I probably saw it when it hit home video shortly after. And it quickly became a movie that I watched quite a few times in childhood because it was a favorite.
I This is the first time I saw it.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
that's cool.
It's almost
yeah.
like we're a few years apart.
It was pretty great. I liked it. I mean,
It's
like, it was a
great.
great kid movie, so I'm here
Yeah,
for it.
yeah.
Yeah. When I mean, given you're growing up too, I imagine it would have, had you seen it, resonated in different ways.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah, totally.
This What's interesting though is 1996 in film is a weird year for film. So horror in the mid 90s kind of disappeared as a genre. There were some horror, but just it most of it wasn't good. A lot of the stuff that we would call horror as on this podcast, but like true blue horror fans wouldn't. It's kind of like what I have in these categories for horror, just because there really wasn't much going on, or everything that was horror was cross genre in with something else. But but it was the mid 90s, so there's like a lot of iconic films here. So we had Independence Day, or ID4 as it was abbreviated, the one with Will
I
Smith.
didn't know there was more than one independent.
And that's just what it's called, ID4. There's two now, but on the
What?
posters it said ID4 because July 4th, Independence Day. And I think it came into theaters on July 4th or something. So like the marketing campaign was just ID4.
Oh my gosh, I never knew that.
Yeah. And then, but there's a sequel that came out a few years ago, but I've not seen it. Mission Impossible, the first one, not the TV show, the movie. Jerry Maguire, so a big year for Tom Cruise. The Birdcage, 101 Dalmatians, a live action. White Squall, which is kind of a nature horror movie we could do one day. Muppet Treasure Island. Fargo, speaking of Twin Peaks, I feel like Fargo and Twin Peaks probably exist in the same universe. Um,
Mm.
Homeward Bound 2. All Dogs Go to Heaven 2. It's a lot of dog movies. Another Roald Dahl movie, James and Giant Peach, the stop motion one that Disney released. Flipper with Elijah Wood in it. Dragonheart, this weird dragon movie. I kind of like it, but it's not good. The Cable Guy, Hunchback of Notre Dame, the animated one. Professor, the one with Eddie Murphy. Train Spotting, really great movie. Uh, but CW for all the addiction stuff in that. Stonewall, the first film about Stonewall. I've not seen it, so I can't say if it's better than the one that came out a few years ago that was trash because it had a bunch of white cis gay boys leading Stonewall. Not accurate. Um, First Wives Club, The Mighty Ducks 3, or as it was called, D3. If These Walls Could Talk, which we referenced in our Witches of Eastwick movie because I was talking about how Witches of Eastwick is kind of pro-birth, especially because they're having the literal
Mm.
spawn of Satan. And I said that surprises me because Cher was in If These Walls Could Talk, which she also directed her segment, which is about an abortion. One of the segments is about an abortion clinic getting bombed. CW's for all that. I'll make sure that's in the show notes. Um, Get on the Bus, Romeo plus Juliet, still my favorite adaptation of Romeo and Juliet. Space Jam, Star Trek First Contact, and Evita.
15 of those.
That's a lot. That's a
15,
lot.
I
This is a big
think.
year for Emily,
It's
apparently.
not that I saw all of them as a kid, because some of them, like The Hunchback of Notre Dame, I only saw as an adult in the last few years.
Oh,
But
really? Interesting. It's one of my favorite Disney ones, especially the
I
song
think
God Help the Outcast. So good.
I think we did it for
River
River
Reviews.
Reviews. Yeah.
Nice. Um, and then in horror, so like I said, horror was in a really weird place. And like we had some really good horror in the late 80s and early 90s, but then it kind of fizzled out went from like 92 until like 96 was like a dead zone of horror. Not much good stuff coming out until the very end of this year. But before this movie that I'm about to reference, Revitalize Horror, we had a lot of these forgettable ones like Lawnmower 2 Beyond Cyberspace. You can just tell that's going to be really good, huh? Um, Hellraiser Bloodline, which is the first direct-to-video movie in that franchise. So again, a movie going from theatrical to direct-to-video is not doing well. And it's also the one that is set in outer space because every 90s franchise had to do a space episode. Weird.
I mean,
And none of them are good. I love space, but if you're gonna
yeah,
do a space movie, at least try to
do a
do
good
something
one.
good. Um, but then and Screamers, so a lot of these like kind of forgettable movies. Tremors 2 Aftershocks, which was direct to video. Uh Phenomenon, this weird John Travolta movie, The Frighteners. Uh but then we got Tales from the Crypt presents Bordello of Blood, which is one of the few horror movies from this period that's actually pretty good. And then we get stuff like horror comedies, which is what the mid 90s was really more excited about. So we had From Dusk Till Dawn. Speaking of Quentin Tarantino, he's in that. Screamers, um, Twister. So we have like horror, nature horror, action. We have Escape from LA, which is John Carpenter. He directed Halloween. It's not really horror, but I have to shout out a famous horror director's movie. Um, and then The Ghost in the Darkness, which is another nature horror, well, animal horror. It's based on the true story about the two lions that were basically eating people in the late 1800s, like the two man-eating lions, which is interesting because lions will usually attack humans for um like dominance or like to if you're in their space and stuff, they attack you, but they don't really attack humans for food. But with the exception of this time period in history when these two lions just basically ate, estimates range, there are at least 36 people who were killed by these two lions, but estimates range as high as 150 people killed by these two lions within like a 2 year period. So, but anyway, The Ghost in the Darkness, great movie. Mid 90s, so sadly not racially aware enough about some of this stuff that they should have been, especially because it's talking about colonial Africa. But it's the mid 90s, but still it's not great. So just know that going into
Hmm.
it. So, but then at
But
the
then,
very end
dun, dun,
of
dun.
the year, in December of 1996, the movie Scream hit theaters, directed by Wes
Ooh.
Craven, and has launched one of the
Heyo.
most successful horror franchises of all time that is still going. It's in its eighth entry, coming up. Seven released 2 years ago, last year. Um, and basically revitalize horror as a genre. And so my thinking is maybe since 2026 would be the 30th anniversary of Scream, maybe that's when we should do our Scream season,
Mm.
2026. So I have a little bit
Interesting.
behind the scenes.
Yeah. Also, I have seen none of those. Pretty sure.
Really? Twister? Not even Twister?
I don't think so. I mean, I've seen like clips of Twister on TV, but I don't
Twister's
think I ever
really
saw
good.
Twister.
Um, yeah, I definitely recommend Twister. It's really good. Uh, much better than Twisters that came out last year, the kind of sequel to it. Anyway, behind the scenes, a lot. I went and did a deep dive on our horror buff episode about Roald Dahl, so I would say subscribe to that. You can even um just do it for 1 month if you just want to catch an episode. But I go a lot into Roald Dahl. I'm not going to repeat a lot of
Hmm.
that stuff here. I except just name that he is um he has his legacy is really complicated because he was very openly anti-Semitic. And some of the stuff which we'll talk about in our deep dive here is like he also is like very fat phobic and very sexist and stuff like that. And that comes out in various ways. I will say this movie does a better job of toning some of that down or shifting some of the focus than The Witches, which we talked about for a horror buff. But even so, like it still comes through a little bit here and there. Um, but yeah, the book was a success, and like Roald Dahl, just beloved children's author for many ways, even with the complicated legacy. The movie was changed not much from the book. It really just it like I said, it softened some of the sexist aspects and stuff of the book. Um, and included a little bit more diverse casting, but it also changed the setting from Britain to America, and the ending of the book is different from the movie. But beyond that, it's a fairly close adaptation, like a modernized adaptation of it, which
Wait, so what was the ending in the book? And I don't know if I've
in the
read the book.
book, Matilda, when she is adopted with Miss Honey, is now using all of her mental powers, uh, using the full capacity of her brain because she's in a supportive environment, so she no longer has telekinetic powers. The telekinetic powers were only because of her being in an environment where she wasn't allowed to use the fullness of her brain and
Oh.
thinking. So that fades away when she's in a supportive environment. Whereas in the movie, it's said, like they say at the end, like she doesn't need to use her powers, but she still does on occasion, for
Hmm.
fun or something like that. It's how the
Which
movie ends it.
I like the movie ending better than. Okay.
But yeah, I think the book also makes it a little harder for the argument of whether Matilda is a witch or not if you go off the book's version. But that's
Probably
a
not.
debate we're going to have in our witch lore section. I'm excited for that. And just to point out what we're referring to is when we announced the season, I heard from one of our listeners saying, "Why did y'all pick Matilda for a witch season? That's she's not a witch." And so I'm like, well, when we get to that, you'll have to listen and see the arguments for and against her being a witch. So we're going to talk about that at the end.
Wahaha.
And I'm going to do my best
I
not to spoil my thoughts on it because I
oh,
think it'll be fun for the debate to kind of keep it
okay, then I won't say
ties.
anything.
I mean, I think
I
you
was
already
about to
revealed
spoil all of
yours.
my thoughts. I mean, I did pick it, so
Yeah, but um then the movie when it came out just kind of was a flop. Nobody really saw it. But then when it was released on home video is when it really developed an audience and it made a huge amount of money in home video and stuff like that. And it's kind of become it's one of those things where you can't quite call it a cult classic because it is very much a mainstream beloved movie now.
Mhm.
But when it came out, it definitely only gained momentum after it hit the home video market.
Maybe I did not see it in theaters and just saw it on home
And
video.
then the musical. So Tim Minchin is a musician, and he's mostly known for writing music, for writing like science-centered music that parodies Christian, like more evangelical Christian stuff. So a lot of his songs are like about how evolution is real and about, and like one of his songs is like about how humans are just monkeys in shoes and but then like the verses are sometimes like digging at like Christians and saying like there are Christians who believe this and that and which is all like legit aspects of what certain Christian traditions believe. So it's really funny. He does a lot of like witty kind of. Stephen Colbert, I think, is someone who does a similar shtick sometimes, where he's like kind of parodying and lampooning it by pretending to be it. Um, so he was most known for that, but he loved the story of Matilda. So he adapted it into a musical that premiered on West End and then came over to Broadway. And then I think 2 years ago, or is when Netflix financed and released a filmed version of the musical. So we will be covering that for our Patreon listeners. You can hear our thoughts on that.
Movie commentary
Yep.
magical.
And I think it's the first watch for both Emily and I. I know some of the behind the scenes and stuff about it and listened to the soundtrack, but I've never actually seen it. So
I'm excited because this season is we're doing this twice. This will be the second time we do it, where we do one story, but like two different versions. And not just like, I guess technically like we kind of had that with like Nightmare on Elm Street. It has a like reboot kind of thing.
hmm
But I really like that like we watched Wizard of Oz and The Wiz,
The Wiz. Yeah.
and then to do
And then we're
Matilda and Matilda
we're
musical.
also doing that with Bewitched and Bewitched.
Yeah. 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 So I'm excited. I think it's fun.
Oh, I also forgot to say, Sabrina the Teenage Witch movie came out, which we did not cover the movie.
That's
But
true.
we did cover two different versions of the show. We covered the classic 90s one and then also the Netflix one. So we're doing that a lot this season, covering two different versions of things. But the movie
And
is funny because it's was a made for TV movie and it was awful, but it starred Melissa Joan Hart and they loved the concept of it enough that they turned it into a TV show because the movie didn't do great, but the TV show of course became a huge hit. So
I love the TV show.
yeah.
Also I love that when we first were talking about Sabrina, both of us thought of Sabrina. We thought of different Sabrinas.
Well, I wanted to do both somehow, but I wasn't sure how to do both. But then I like our version of how we decided to do one of each, which I think worked out great.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yeah. Um, let's see. Well, I think that's all for my behind the scenes stuff. I will include for our show notes a link to some of the ways that Roald Dahl is a trash person, so you can read that for yourself and all that.
Mhm.
Yeah, but we also in our witches episode, and I think we'll return to this here too, is we also talk about some of the things that we like about Roald Dahl that he doesn't, that many children's authors don't do, and so and like talking about death and abuse and really like stuff that people try to shield children from, yet it's the reality of so many kids that
Mhm.
you should be able to talk about it in ways that kids can access and understand. And so I'm glad he's one of the few authors that does that.
Yep. Yeah.
So we will get into our one sentence summaries then.
Mhm.
Am I
Are
supposed to
you
go
ready?
first?
Well, I don't know.
Okay.
You go first.
My one sentence summary is Miss Honey is Bay.
My one sentence summary is chocolate should be a treasure for everyone.
Mm. Yeah,
Uh,
one, Susanna.
I've been thinking about this actually all day and having some trouble figuring it out. I'm not quick enough. I'm not quick on it. Don't
It's
wear
okay.
ribbons.
Yeah.
Don't wear ribbons. Don't wear
Yeah, if
ribbons.
you're doing
Don't worry.
If
espionage,
you're doing espionage, don't wear ribbons.
I like it.
Ribbons and espionage do not go together.
So I love it. That's great. So I can't wait for a retrospective when we try to guess some of these. Don't wear ribbons. Will you remember that's Matilda? Maybe. It'll be fun. Um, so for the walkthrough, I debated saying this in my first memories, but but I want to kind of start off with this conversation is I think both Emily and I alluded to this, is just how much we identify with Matilda.
Hmm.
And also, this movie is part of the reason I chose to become an educator. And so it kind of shares that aspect with my life too.
Hmm.
Because of the role of Miss Honey, and that's why I said Miss Honey is beige. And also, I want to say, like, she was one of my first sapphic crushes. Her and Mary Stuart Masterson, like, I just those two, and then Laura Linney shortly after. Like, those were my three. Like, oh, my sapphic.
That's funny. I also Laura Linney and Mary Stuart Masterson.
So, yeah.
Totally. Um, yeah. So smart kid, yes.
Hmm.
Also, like she definitely feels fairly neurodivergent coded, autism coded.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
in the
I
whole thing,
think for sure.
which
And
I
like
never
it shows
noticed
up,
until I was like, oh, yeah.
yeah.
Totally.
And it shows up in so many cool ways, like how she is very blunt about the cops and it's kind of in an ACAB sense too. I love it. But also like when she just
When she did
well
like,
writing at such a young age is something that many forms of all many people autistic people have said that that's one of the symptoms that showed up early for them is being able to read and write at a very young age.
and I think
Um,
like her, not just the bluntness, but like
yeah,
her
I was trying to
dad
remember the
said
moment.
people
Yes, that's what I was trying to remember. Yes,
yeah,
thank you.
people deserve to be punished when they do bad things or whatever. And instead of
She
kids,
took that a very literal way.
yeah, and then started punishing her parents.
Yep,
Deservedly so, right?
yep,
Like
yep,
they they did bad, and according to their own rules, they deserve to be punished.
yep.
Um, but yeah, so I think like that part, I obviously the like ability to do lots of math in her head is
Hmm.
super coded. Um,
And Mara Wilson's performance in this is very like she's such a great, like you said, such a great children's actor and such a great actor that like
mhm,
she can play roles very diversely. So it's not just the fact that she's a kid, but she has a very reserved performance in this compared to some of her other movies. And I think that's also part of the character Matilda is just this. So like what
mhm,
people usually used to say in very harmful ableist terms of like emotionally stunted, but also she's a survivor of an abusive family, which would contribute to that. But also it's just also many autistic people express emotions, like feel emotions, but people assume that we don't because we don't express it the same way they do. And I can definitely see that in Matilda as well.
yeah, yeah.
I also want to say librarians are the best. Oh my God, the
Yeah, they are.
librarian in this movie was amazing.
Yes, and shout out to all librarians everywhere, especially in places like um, Iowa and
Yeah.
Florida and stuff. And shout out to our favorite librarian, Stephanie Kaler,
Hmm.
Stephanie!
who is going to be a guest when we do our literature retrospective.
Yeah. I'm so excited
And
for that.
yeah, I'm very
And
excited.
so, like, one of the things I love about the librarian is like there are ways that adults interact with kids, and we'll get to this in the deep dive, I'm sure, that is like very much like an assuming kids are not intelligent or smart and stuff like that. That's very what's the word I'm looking for? Like very patronizing. But the librarian in here, like there was space for her to ask in a child appropriate way, like, can I help you find a book, perhaps one with many pictures, like assuming that that's what, like in a good way, like assuming like I want to help find an accessible book for this kid, and then being blown away by Matilda just being starting to read like books like Moby Dick and stuff like that, and but like keeping pace with it, and like so like even just the way she like asked Matilda first, like, would you like me to find one of the pictures in such a non-patronizing way that also is able to be um immediate as soon as she finds out, no, that's not what Matilda's interested, that she's able to roll with and get what she needs and stuff. It's just so cool. And then like offering her a library card. You can take as many books as you want home. Just like so sweet. And get and like I know it's like a children's movie, so it's not supposed to be realistic, but also just like I totally would see a librarian giving a kid a library card without a parent's signature if they get the sense that the kid wouldn't be able to get the parent's signature, and just that kind of awesomeness of like librarians doing stuff to help with literacy and kids and just being great people.
Libraries are so important and so
Right?
wonderful on so many levels. And like, I'm surprised they haven't already been federally defunded.
Right?
Because I think they are one of the best places for resistance too.
Hmm.
Um, Literally, they're about free education.
Community building, resistance, and
Mhm.
library. So we haven't talked about this in the podcast recently, but we've said this many times. It's just a reminder that library, one of the cool things about libraries is that they have lots of books, and I'm a book nerd. I love books, but libraries are also so much more than just books. Like they have free internet access, they have magazines, newspapers, so you can keep up with the information. They have Many have tools and accessibility devices that they rent out. They have movies, CDs, music, all sorts of stuff. Um, like you can get, I know one of the libraries near me like rents out things like lawnmowers and stuff like that. So you can have access to cool stuff like that. So it's just like they're so important. And they have community space, they have public space. It's really good for community building and resistance and all the things. Also use your local library. Like
Yes.
I it is important, I think, to show that libraries get use so that it helps compel in this age of purposely trying to control um, lines of communication and truth telling and access to information to say, no, we are choosing to access this public resource. And especially those of us who can maybe just buy books and shit. It's like, still go to a library and use your library. Show that it's important. Not everybody has that privilege, so make use of it. And
Yeah. And request books. One of the best things that
yes,
you can do for authors, whether or not you can buy their book, is to request their book from the library.
yeah,
And you can request their audiobooks.
right?
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah. I typically like the way I do things, just as an example of how I access libraries. The primary way I read fiction, as I was saying earlier, is through audiobook. And so I will use my library to get, and the app Libby, fantastic app, to listen to an audiobook. And then if I like the audiobook and want to support the author, I can definitely see her advocating for herself in that too, in that moment.
Yeah. Were you gonna say something, Susanna?
No, I was just agreeing with Pace wholeheartedly that like, and I didn't realize it until they said something, but like, yeah, she's 100% queer coded. She's a
Yeah.
Well, Emily was the one to
100%
point
queer
out that, yeah.
coded.
I
I
said
mean,
that. Thank you.
like 100% queer coded as like the spinster. Sorry,
Yep.
Sorry, Emily.
And like
Um,
into sports in a very
Mhm.
way that is stereotypically perceived as dykey, I
yeah,
say, as a lesbian.
yeah,
Particularly the three track and field events that
Right?
she did at.
but
Right?
also like, I mean, like, there's also this like this attitude of like that's why people are single is because they're awful terrible lesbians, like you know what I mean,
Mhm.
and that eh,
Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable now. I'm gonna have to look at my
Yeah.
ratings again. Other than that, like, yeah, I love it, but
Yeah.
I'm
Don't worry.
sitting
I'm
in
gonna
that recognition.
you feel right when we get to ratings, feel however you want to feel for ratings, but this is going to be a pretty high one for me, just so you know.
Ah,
Um,
yeah, I just have to sit and wrestle with it for a little
yeah,
bit.
I like it. I
Yeah,
like it.
that's legit.
I Part of my rating is like
Yeah.
Yeah, I
I
really appreciate that too. Like I'm not a person who has children, but like my godchildren I lived with, like their mother and
mhm.
I were both going through a divorce at the same time. So I moved in with them when they were five, well, 4.5 and 2. And they picked up on everything. They knew everything. They knew
Mhm.
Mhm.
all the complicated things. They think big thoughts. Like
Yep.
Sage was very much like Sage was very sad, and I was sent in to find out why Sage was so sad. And Sage was obsessed with dinosaurs, and Sage was afraid. They said, "Oh, I'm afraid another rock's gonna come." And I was like, okay, and what kind of rock? A big rock from the sky. It's gonna come and it's gonna wipe everything out, and people will end up being fossils. Everything will be fossils. And then they got really quiet, and then they said, but then it won't be my country or your country or Miss Richardson, that was the teacher, or Miss Richardson country or the US country. It'll be God's country everywhere. And I was like, oh God,
Mhm.
okay, that's some
Mhm.
theology there, that we can't all
Yeah.
be one humankind. We can't all be one kingdom unless we're all dead. Like, yeah, kids are so much
That is not
smarter
how
than,
I interpreted that sentence, but
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 like that's sort of an end conclusion, and it just, yeah, kids so much smarter than we give them credit for.
yeah, yeah. Um, for Nerds at Church, we did one of our deep dives in our when we were on the lectionary was on childism and the
Mhm.
prejudice. And Dowd has a lot of stuff that they've done around childism as well.
Same though.
expression, and I always knew it was an expression, but I also thought it was real and like literal in
Right?
the movie.
I like how we both thought the same thing.
Yeah, but I continue to like I I still think
It's fair. You can read it. You can anything that's text can be interpreted, and so film is text. But I love it. Um, oh, and the other thing I wanted to say about that is I work with youth as like my day job. Well, all ages, but youth especially. And one of them was part of a Matilda stage production of the musical, but like the kids version, so a little bit like watered down, but like essentially that. And she said that the favorite part of the person playing the kid was he had to actually eat chocolate cake every single night. And that there's like a little bit behind the scenes of like the cake itself, I think was fake and on a lowering platform, but the top part was real. So he had to like eat off the top part, and then the cake would lower to make it look like he was eating it faster and faster.
oh
But like still having to legitimately eat the top layer
yeah,
though, which was real cake. I'm like, oh my God, I want to do that so bad. I want to be in that role. Gonna
right.
eat cake every night
So
for a
good.
week.
Yeah. That would be amazing. I
Right?
would be a fan. Can you imagine like auditioning for that role and then being like, so
Right.
one of the things is you have to be able to eat, like, you cannot have any allergies to gluten or dairy. You have to be
Well, you can make a
willing to,
gluten-free cake or dairy-free
I
cake
mean, I
too.
guess,
Like there are
but
ways to work around it. But
it's true.
yes,
But like the conditions of you getting a role are your
it's like you have
ability
to be willing to eat
willingness to eat chocolate cake.
a layer of chocolate cake.
I love it. I love it.
I'd do it though, honestly.
Hmm. Same. Yeah. So, speaking of chocolate cake, fat phobia, huh?
Yeah.
Deep
Um,
theological discussion. Look at that transition, though.
that was amazing. I'm very impressed.
Thank
Um,
you.
Fat phobia. Yeah. So I alluded to this, but in every single, well, not every single Roald Dahl book, but in most of his books,
Really messed
he
up.
has very clear opinions about what kind of things harm kids. And two things that he repeats on is being fat, and the other one is the TV. And he go and in most of his
This
books,
one
there's a
has to do with.
character who uses TV and is therefore unintelligent or something
The
like
TV
that.
kid, the TV kid in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yep, exactly. And the other TV kid who's also the fat kid in The Witches. He's both in one character. Um, and it's just really frustrating. And it's just stereotypes and it's awful and I hate it. And
Yeah.
that's still a lingering thing. More so than TV phobia is like in culture, especially around children, especially around children's weight. There's a lot of like consternation from pop culture and from news outlets and stuff that say really shitty, bad science about kids
Mhm.
and obesity, which is an Osler epidemic and all that gross stuff.
Yeah. Well, and it's. I mean, speaking of fascism, right? It comes from eugenics
Hmm.
and the idea that some people don't deserve to live, and that some
Right?
people should be killed for the greater good of the human species or whatever. And
Yes.
like BMI is the same thing. It is eugenics.
Yeah.
And it
And
is
to
not science. It's not based in real science. And I
and
think
to
especially
name the racism part of eugenics too. Like
yeah,
as race was developing is also when the fat phobia was developing kind of hand in hand with that.
yeah,
It's a way
yeah.
to distinguish whiteness.
Hmm. And it's just it's so frustrating. It's frustrating in general, but also like it, it's so frustrating in this particular moment because there is so much of fascism that is geared
Mhm.
towards like letting people die, or
Yep.
encouraging people to die.
Yep.
And a lot of it we know is wrong. You can name that as wrong. But like intentional weight loss and all of that is still such a huge industry that we
Hmm.
haven't gotten to the place in this country yet to where it's really mainstream to be like, actually, no, that's bullshit.
Yep.
Right? Like,
Yep. Yeah.
I love my doctor and she's fantastic. And I point blank was like, I'm not interested in these things. She was like, it's a number. That's all it is. It's just one number of many numbers. It's only as useful as that. And it, like, which is okay and progress, but also like it's a bullshit number
Hmm.
based off of
Hmm.
like a particular cis white thin man.
Yep. And, like, do you remember in elementary school, the Reagan fitness shit that we had to do? That I think a lot of that's been toned down in the past 20 years, but like Reagan instituted a thing in like PEs that there were like national fitness assessments that people had to do. So
Yeah,
you had to
the
like run a
presidential and
mile
vice
every year.
presidential.
You had to,
Yeah,
yeah. Oh my God.
presidential fitness
Yep.
boards or whatever.
Yep.
I never got the presidential one because I couldn't do a pull up because my body was not built with those
Yeah, I
particular
was terrible at
muscles
it.
and
I
muscles.
am not, my body is not good at particular types of
Yeah.
fitness. The Eve thing is weird here. It's not as like bad or explicit as like Willy Wonka, where the TV is clearly damaging this child's brain. Here it seems more like it's just this obnoxious parent trying to make her do something she's just simply not interested in, as opposed to commenting specifically on the awfulness of TV itself.
I don't know. It also feels like TV and the parents' neglect and abuse is tied together to me. So like it
Yeah,
does feel like it's a
agreed.
commentary. It's just not a commentary on kids. It's a commentary on or and it's a commentary on her brother, right? Who like
Mhm.
cannot write fast enough to take notes on his dad's math numbers
Yeah.
and so doesn't know
Yep.
the answer, even though he's the favorite kid, but because he watches TV with his kid.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, and like anything, I think media, most types of media are just the type of media is morally neutral. It's what type of stuff you show on media or what you choose to consume on media that becomes more problematic. So like I don't think there's
Mm-hmm.
anything wrong with TV in and of itself.
Yeah.
And yet, um, and like things like the public broadcasting company and stuff like that, doing things like Sesame Street, Mr. Rogers' Neighbor, like shows designed for children to help them learn and build self-esteem and learn about other people and like it does so much good. So I hate when there's stuff that
Mm-hmm.
just like dismisses TV as all bad.
I loved Sesame Street.
Hmm.
I grew up on Sesame Street and
Same.
dreamed of actually growing up on Sesame Street.
Yep.
Um, but yeah.
The other thing we talk about this, a lot of horror is really good at this. And this is another example of queer chosen family, of Mrs.
Mm-hmm.
Honey and Matilda becoming family, even though they're not related by blood, but then legally so there's like a adoption plot in here, but even so, like just them choosing and to enter this family relationship together and both having consent in it, which is
Yeah,
kind of lovely and beautiful.
yeah.
And we'll get to the HNAC test because there is something I want to say about the moment with Matilda's biological family at the end that is
Mm,
interesting in this process. But
yeah, yeah. And I think like in the realm of queerness in this movie, I think this movie is really queer in a lot of ways on the queer chosen family. and the like one of the things I love is that every kid is bullied, right? Like this is a school where all of the kids are bullied and they find ways to stick up for each other and to push back against the bully um in ways that are like supportive and caring, and they don't like rat each other out
Hmm.
and stuff. And I think that that's really cool and not something that we see a lot. Like we don't see models where kids can fight back against a bully and win, really. um we see like individual bullies against individual bullied, uh,
Yeah.
and yeah. And also I think like in terms of gender, right, like the one time that Miss Trunchbull is like, yes, Miss Trunchbull, sir. um and that goes to the queer coding, that goes to the like queer coding, particularly as a butch
Hmm.
lesbian. um and I
And also the military tradition too, because in
Yeah,
military they call any superiors a sir regardless of gender.
yeah, but I think there's this dynamic with Miss Trunchbull, and we kind of already talked
Yep.
about it a bunch, of like the way that she probably was bullied and she probably was
Hmm.
like not treated fairly, and um you know, the
Yeah.
trope of step siblings in in any kid's thing, right? Like there's always
Hmm.
something about step kids and step siblings. um and also like the who done it thing is weird, just to throw that out there. But
Yeah. And the whole gender thing, like that's something we talked about in The Witches too, about Roald Dahl in particular, how a lot of feminist critique of his works has been he only writes two types of women. One who is abusive towards
Mhm.
children and one who puts aside their like is the overly feminine mother type who puts aside her own agency for a child. And those are the two women we have here. Well, three women. We have his
Yep.
birth mom, we have Mrs. Trunchbull or Miss Trunchbull, and then we have Miss Honey. And Miss Honey's
Mhm.
the maternal one, and the other
Yeah,
two are abusive.
yeah, it is.
That was my
And
major
they also get
criticism of
into beautyism and sexism. Oh, I saw you're about to talk, Susanna. You're muted.
that was my major criticism of Mark Twain. Like
Mm,
that it's a very Mark Twain thing where like women are these very they're these first of all they're very stoic characters. They don't
hmm.
change. Even the heroes don't change. They're the same thing in the beginning as they are in the end.
Hmm.
They're
Right.
not dynamic characters. And then like secondly like they're considered the civilized. They're either like wanton like get rid of them, put them on an island and burn it kind of person, or they're a person who is like the civilizer and the raiser and
Mhm.
the mothering type and
Hmm.
all of that, but they're never anything in between. It's always
Yep.
been like one of my major problems with Twain. And I
Yeah.
would get in trouble
Stephen
for it
King's
for
the same
college.
way. So
Yeah,
many.
yeah.
Uh, and that also kind of gets into ugliness too here of Roald Dahl is one of many people, including J.K. Rowling, who we do not like for a lot of reasons, and so many authors who equate beauty with goodness and ugliness with badness, especially in a gendered way. Like men can
Yeah.
be any type of attractiveness, doesn't matter. But the women are either beautiful and good slash motherly or ugly and bad and abusive. And that's really gross.
Hmm. Yeah. It's I yeah.
Um,
That's how.
ageism is a big thing in this movie, but like in a way that is commented on well, of saying like this clearly ageism is bad according to this movie, and that adults harm children when they and also do a disservice to themselves even when they do not are not open to seeing children as people and having
Hmm.
insights and stuff like that.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
They end up getting caught by the cops.
Yep, by the cops. Which I love, even though Matilda wanted to get this gets me to ACAB pieces, even though
Yeah.
Matilda wanted to get revenge on her children, right, on her children. Strike that, reverse it. On her parents, when Matilda wanted
Mhm.
to get revenge on her parents, she still was disrupting the cops, which I love because
Yeah.
she's like full on ACAB. Um,
Yep. Yeah. Which like kudos also just like kudos to her because that
right?
takes a lot of emotional intelligence and maturity to like know that your parents are harmful and abusive to you and need to not be in situations where they can continue to harm you, and also that selling them out to the cops is bad idea, is like not what you want to
Mhm.
do, is not living
Yeah,
in your own values, which like how many of us have like that mature of an understanding of our own values and the choices we need to make to live into them
yep,
as adults, let alone when we were until this age. Well done, kid. Well
for
done.
sure, for sure. Uh, I already talked about our love of reading. Don't need to go over that again. I think that came up a lot in our conversation. But there's one last thing that I want to talk about, and I know you all have other stuff too. But it's the theology of pedagogy and
Mm-hmm.
how important that is. From you can say his last name better, Emily. But the pedagogy of the oppressed by Pablo, do
Yeah,
you know?
I know who you're talking
Off,
about.
yeah,
My
but
brain is a blank, but
that's okay. But just the idea of like how we teach, and there's another book I'm reading right now called Queer Calling by Mark D. Jordan that is all about like how we teach can be an act of resistance and can
hello
be
Freya. I
thank
don't
you.
know it as well because it's technically Portuguese, but
Um, but it is but just like how good of a teacher Miss Honey is, even to the point of
mm-hmm.
like just believing Matilda, like even though she herself, when Matilda comes out to her about having telekinetic powers, that she doesn't believe at first, but she's still honoring what Matilda is saying and not dismissing
Mm-hmm.
it. And then even
Mm-hmm.
like says, well, when we sometimes we feel like we have power, so we can like stand up for ourselves and stuff, and like tying it in a really concrete, cool way. And then, of course, once Matilda proves her that she does have telekinetic powers, just how she accepts that and like in a way
Mm-hmm.
that is like supportive of Matilda and not like scared of her or saying, why are you weird or different, but just like acknowledging it as part of who Matilda is. And there's so much I love about that to the point that like I wanted to be that person when I grew up. And that's a big part of why I'm a teacher, is because of this movie.
Yeah, I love that. Also, fun fact, Pedagogy of the Oppressed, very accessible for Portuguese speakers and readers, and got like so academized in the
There,
translation to English to make it so much harder. At least the
thank you for
original.
saying that. There's a real big issue with that happening in English language translations, and it's really
Mhm.
disgusting. Um,
I think.
another example is like uh both Foucault and Derrida, who are like seen as the founders of postmodern theology and queer theology and stuff like that,
Mhm.
when they're translating to English, were made intentionally obfuscated it in a way that makes Foucault and Derrida inaccessible to most people.
Mhm.
And also, I think builds up this reputation that like queer theology's sources and stuff are these high academic things that the average person can't comprehend when it's like, no, queerness is universal. Well, not universally understood, but universally experienced
Yeah.
in
And
various ways.
I mean, I think that's a big, to get more meta on it, like that's a big part of the push against intellectualism, right? Because I was I think I was watching or reading something about like the way that the Democrats just kept getting like higher, like elitist, and like ultimately both parties are made up of millionaires and billionaires, and then they just cater to their millionaires and billionaire corporations and stuff. And that aspect of it, and that like making things more difficult and making it harder for people to understand, making both like has the thing of like there's an entire industry of tax preparation, right? When the government already should know what what you have to pay. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the flip side of that, there's this pushback against like, well, I shouldn't need all of this. I shouldn't have to have all this like the push. Part of it was the push in for colleges, right? Like the
Mm-hmm.
push for my generation that like every kid was pushed to go to college. At a certain level, and like that was the assumption, was like you are going to a 4-year college. There's not a push for trade school and that sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And um that all of that, and then not having jobs even when we went to
Yep.
college, um then has this backlash effect of like not trusting the academics, not trusting the
Mm-hmm.
elites, and this anti-intellectualism that plays out in not trusting science, it because then
Yeah.
it backfires, and like people, and then you add in the like Christian nationalism, conservative Christians who are like going in it to specifically plant misinformation, and like it just snowballs into this whole thing. And like
Mm-hmm.
that is not the reason that Trump was reelected, but it is part of it. It is a part of it because nobody addressed it, because
Yeah.
people just kept making it harder to access across the board, like theology, education, everything.
Yeah. And I want to be clear to name too that this has escalated very quickly within the last week with Trump and also in the lead up
Mhm.
to his election. And there's a distinct way that Christian white nationalism and stuff is influencing, and fascism is influencing politics in ways that are different now. And
Mhm.
also, this anti-intellectualism has been a huge part of both parties for at least the last 70 years of trying to create an academic elite while simultaneously discrediting them.
Mhm.
So only people of wealth, and particularly white people, should be able to access a 4-year education. And also, we're not going to trust what that 4-year education tells us. So it's like this weird kind of internal tension that both parties have and American culture wrestles with
Yeah.
as a whole.
Yeah.
Um, you know, yeah.
You know, just a few soapboxes to get on today.
So many, but good ones and important ones for this
Mm-hmm.
era.
Yeah. Yep, yep. Um, Also, there's just a lot about abuse and neglect, and we kind of alluded to it a little bit, talked about it a little bit, got into it more. Well, not really. Um, we talked more about death in our witches episode and the way that Roald Dahl approaches death, but like this approach to abuse and neglect, I think, is really helpful for kids, in that any kid who's experienced something like this, it helps them know that they're not alone.
Mhm.
But then also the flip side of that is anybody who doesn't know, like they get a glimpse into a different way of living in the world that different kids are experiencing all the time. Um, and I think that that is really, really important. And I
Mhm.
have like some books on my shelf because I am the kind of pastor that is a you have to have a robust children's library in order to be a good pastor um, kind of person. And I love kids' books. Um, so I have a bunch. And I have different ones that deal with different things like grief. And like there's one, Chris Rosh. I also love Chris Roshka because he's my favorite children's book illustrator. But um, there's one that he did that's like a kid and an iceberg. He did one with a purple balloon because kids who had terminal illnesses frequently drew purple balloons. And so he did one with that. But there's also one that like a kid tackles an iceberg or something, and that's about like basically a drunk aunt and like how the kid like sticks up for themselves um, and holds boundaries about not doing what they don't want to do with an adult who is trying to get them to do something they don't want to do. Um, so there are like a lot of good books out there that do that. And I think Roald Dahl is in a particular age group that it's really helpful for.
Mhm.
Um, and that I have far fewer books in that age group than I need. But yeah.
Agreed.
Also, I think it's really cool the way that Miss Honey is able to. I think both Matilda and Miss Honey are really courageous in different ways. And I think for Matilda, it's maybe a more autism flavored courage where it's like, well, of course I'm going to do this kind of thing,
Hmm.
more than a, okay, I'm scared, but I have to be brave. She's just like, well, of course, this is the thing that has to happen. Um, versus Miss Honey, who has to be really brave because she is going back into a house, the house of someone who abused her from
Hmm.
as a child. And that's not something that you can just like walk back into. But she does it, and she does it, and she's very courageous about it. Um, and part of it is because she's doing it with Matilda, and so she has someone else to protect. And I think that helps a lot of us when we can fight for ourselves because we're fighting for somebody else. But I think it also is like healing for her to have someone else validate the horror that she went through and the wrongness of that.
Yeah,
Yeah, those were my big things. With a deep dive.
I love it. So, are we ready for our big debate of the episode? I don't think it's really that big of a debate.
Dun, dun, dun.
Is Matilda a witch or not? And um,
Okay,
yeah.
here's the thing. I had never heard that Matilda was not a witch until our listener
Did you ever hear
shared.
that she was though, too?
I was always just assumed that she was a witch.
By
Like I
you
don't
or
know
by
how I came
everybody
to
you
that
knew?
conclusion, but like it was just always that Matilda is a witch. I don't know. I don't
Interesting.
know where it came from. It just always was there.
That's fair. I will say, I wonder, like, I'm not saying this is what you did, but I wonder if some people assume she's a witch because she is a girl with powers. And if sh it was a boy, it
Hmm.
would not be, automatically be assumed that it was magic or witchcraft.
I mean, I do
Um,
think it would not have automatically been assumed that it was witchcraft if it was a boy. That I think is a
and
fair.
the interesting thing, and just to clarify, like the text of the film itself and the book neither explicitly say that she is the witch, neither explicitly say she's using magic, but they do use the terms powers, and the movie also says telekinesis. So just on that, there is room for interpretation of what her powers are. But I just want to like clarify, like that's what is said versus what's not said explicitly in the film.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
never says where she got her powers from. So like a valid interpretation would be witchcraft.
Hmm. Yeah. It's so fascinating to me that like it didn't even cross my mind that it couldn't be
Hmm.
witchcraft, that like it wouldn't be witchcraft. Um, and I will stick by it because my
Yeah,
little self decided it, and my little kid self
I like
is
it.
going to be believed because we're gonna believe kids today.
Yeah. The one the one argument, so like I am all for interpreting it stuff media however you want and stuff. Um, my personal interpret I definitely see what you're saying and I agree with it. And I think a valid interpretation is seeing her as a witch. And also like the reason I personally won't say she's a witch in my head canon or interpretation is that be is that I feel like other movies that we've covered on witches this season and the genre of witches itself is that it is an identity that is either thrust upon someone in a form of through oppression or it is claimed by the person in some way. And that because of how good of a metaphor that is for queerness, I hesitate to use witch for someone who's not claiming that identity for themselves or is part of an oppressed class of people who are witches, like in the movie Haxan, as an example.
Yeah,
So like
yeah,
that's the one caveat I have for my own interpretation of it.
yeah. And I think that that's we were texting about this ahead of time, so spoilers. I already heard you say that, which is helpful. And I think that there's a lot of validity to that.
Hmm.
And I think as a kid, right, like as a queer kid growing up who had never heard the word queer and didn't know that bisexuality was a thing, I was still queer.
Yeah.
And I think that's the space of like, because she is so young, because um because she is so young, because she is like she's owning the powers and she's owning that she can do stuff with it. And also like has she heard the term, like I might have heard the word bisexuality, but I didn't
Yeah.
know that I could be a bisexual, right? Has she heard the term witch in a way that
Yeah.
she could even fathom
Hmm.
identifying as a
Which is
witch,
fair. I mean,
right?
with the amount of books she's been reading, though, and she does talk about fairy tale books in particular. But no, your point still stands. I'm just saying
No, no, like,
that.
well, and that's why I did
Yeah.
the caveat, right? Like, she
Hmm.
could have heard the term witch without knowing
Yeah.
or thinking that like that could also be me.
I think, yeah, I think what's really cool is that both of our interpretations acknowledge the queerness of Matilda's character
Mm-hmm.
too. So, like, I think we're 100% agreed on that and the allegory of her embracing an identity of other and different. Um,
Mm-hmm.
But for
Yeah,
me, I would say that's a queer narrative, not a witch narrative for this film. Whereas you're saying it also is a witch narrative for this film and queer. So just to
I mean,
clarify and summarize for our audience, I think. So
I'm a yes.
that we're agreeing on it.
I'm
mm-hmm.
definitely. I think she's a witch.
Yeah.
I think she's a witch, but I mean, like we define things differently. Like,
Yeah, of
like
course.
for me, like I spent all that time. So I went to Valparaiso, right? So there's this like
Yeah.
religious school. So like to get my feminism in, I had to do a bunch of like women in Catholic history and women in all of
Hmm.
these like right. So to you had to build your own major if it was even slightly progressive. So like I had to do a lot of this work about gender and history. So for me, like the way that I identify what a witch, like one, I understand that people who do a lot of people who identify as a witch identify as a witch very intentionally, which is where I get Pace's idea. Like it's an intentionality, that the craft is very about intentionality. Like witchcraft is all about intention.
Yeah.
So like how you label yourself, I could see that being intention. But then there's also the academic part of me, like what has a witch? So there's prescriptive and descriptive,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
And like and descriptive, if I take the collective humanity, what has been called a witch before? And so for me, that what has been called a witch before are really smart, really talented women who didn't fit the mold and generally came from really crappy backgrounds or were dealing with something really heavy. You know, like their husbands had died, so they were alone because their husbands were died from the Black Death, or they went off on a crusade and they were left and they were alone and they had to figure out how to raise their kids and and so they were considered off and different and weird. And or they had ideas about, I don't know, Protestantism, or they like women who stepped out of line were witches.
Yeah,
so
100%.
from that particular thing, I'm gonna call her witch.
Yeah.
Also, I think, you know, what's a special power? Like, why do X-Men get to be X-Men and like women with powers get to be witches? Like, let's, you know, I'm in the.
That's my thing, though. That's why I don't want to label as a witch. Like, she can have powers without it being a witch. So, like, for me, it's like part of me is like pushing against the like idea that just because she's a girl who has powers, she's automatically a witch. Because the film doesn't. Since the film doesn't say that, my fear is like if we say that, then we are putting a layer of interpretation on the film that the film itself is ambiguous.
But my question is, why don't we? Like, I would turn it around and be like, why don't they want to call themselves witches? Like, why don't we call men who are witches? You know, like, why do they get to be superheroes and we're witches?
But like, no, but that's the thing is like in comics, Wonder Woman isn't a witch. Like, I think comics is the place of diversity where we don't call people witches. So the X-Men have. Sadly, they have women in it, and they're still called the X-Men, which is super sexist and gross. But like in that universe, they are mutants, and so are the men. Like their source of power is the same, and so witchcraft in this country has the association with Satanism and magic. And since her powers are never once described as magic, even by other people, they're described as powers, but never magic. I'm like. That's also my autistic brain of like having to categorize something neatly. And if I was asked to describe a witch in fiction, it'd be that she had magic. And in this, it's not referred to as magic. You can interpret it as magic, but since it's not, that's my autistic brain saying, well, it can't be witch then, because there's no magic in this universe. There's a scientific explanation, and the scientific explanation is she's so smart and it's being so underutilized that she developed telekinetic powers.
I mean, yeah, and I get that. I do. I guess and the more that I actually look into various pagan belief systems, because I am curious about a bunch of things because it does speak to me on a lot of levels. The more I realize that I don't, like, they're calling something magic, but they feel like everything is connected. Like, everything is connected. Like, they have a physical... A lot of them believe, and I also, and this is where I feel it too, like that there is a thing that connects everything in the universe, and that a particular person who can tap into that, who's smart enough and open enough and, you know, creative enough to tap into it, that it's not powers per se, it's being able to tap into something that is a physical and real thing. Yeah, it requires this intentionality. And I would go as far as to be like, science has some pretty witchy shit in it, you know, like quantum entanglement, which literally Einstein called spooky action from a distance. I mean, he was this close to saying atoms are witches, right? Like this close. So like, I don't know. I don't know that like necessarily witches necessarily consider them to be of the fantastical realm. That like they consider magic to be of the physical, very real realm. But I mean, everybody's different. But I think there's a case to be made that magic could also be
for sure.
You know, something of the very real realm.
Oh, for sure.
Like a super smart girl, just pushed to her limit. Yeah. Which would have been great. I really wish I could have seen this as a child, because that would have been great for me.
I know. That's
it was great for me.
It would be so great.
Do if we see Matilda as a witch, is there witch lore specific to this movie about witches that we want to name?
I
I
think
guess the
partly,
source of powers can be intelligence would be one.
yeah, source of power
Underutilized
can be intelligent.
intelligence.
Also, I think there's like a connection to strong emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
Or at least it started over that, but then practice allowed her to use it without
Mhm.
that.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's
So
very the
practice makes
craft,
better.
right? Like that's a
Yeah.
lot like the craft. You gotta tap into your emotions. So I mean, that's
Yeah.
across the
Yeah.
line.
And that it's something that she grows into. It like the powers aren't innate all the time from birth,
Yeah,
right?
they
Like there are
need
things that are
practice and
weird
they
about
need
her, but she has to like get she has um the inciting incident to get the
Hmm.
power.
Mm.
Yeah. Love it. Love it. Um, I guess then we can rate the film. We're rating it out of 10 grimoires, but since there isn't a grimoire in this movie per se, there is, in fact, a book that is referenced by name several times, and the final book that appears in the film even, which is the book Moby Dick by Herman Melville,
Indeed,
which
indeed.
as a comment on the book of Moby Dick being used, I honestly think that's the
No
most
comment.
unrealistic part of this movie. Not
Agreed.
because,
Agreed.
not because that Matilda wouldn't be able to read or be interested or understand or comprehend it. Absolutely, will do all that. But that would be a favorite of hers. I
Yeah.
mean, it's a good book
It's
for a
because it's
reason in
a
the literary canon, but
favorite
it's not.
Roald dolls and it signals intelligence in the
Yes, that's what I was gonna
classic
say. Is I feel
cishet
like
white guy
Yeah, I
it's
was
kind
gonna
of
say
like
it's
how the
such a
Peanuts.
success, white guys.
I feel like it's how the Peanuts comic strip uses War and Peace by Tolstoy as kind of a similar, like, if these kids are reading this, so they are smart. And it's
Yeah,
like Matilda's reading Moby Dick, so they're smart. And it's like,
yeah.
Yep.
yeah, but
Yep.
no, it's not.
100%.
No.
I will
Agreed.
say,
So
How it's
agree.
working. Yeah.
I've read Moby Dick. I get why people
Mhm.
consider it a classic. The writing and prose is beautiful. And it is a really boring book. There's not much of a plot, and it's way too long. So,
I believe
anyway.
you.
So who's going
I believe
first?
you.
Because I'm trying to get my graphics right. I'm super excited about
Okay.
this.
Emily usually needs, so you can probably assume that's always going to be at least me going first because Emily
Okay,
never
cool.
wants to go first.
Okay.
Pretty much.
So I will say that that I don't know. Like part of me wants so badly to rate it a 10 out of 10, but part of me also just because of Roald Dahl's legacy, um, which we talked about a lot in The Witches, even though this movie does a better job with it. And some of the other stuff we talked about, like the fat phobia and stuff and sexism, like I have to knock it at least half a point, but I think I'm gonna knock it a whole point. So 9 out of 10 Moby Dicks is still amazing movie, still classic, high rewatch value, but not quite
Mhm.
perfect. 9 out of 10.
Do you have a favorite? I mean, it's not a kill, but a
Yeah, there aren't
favorite.
really any kills, so I guess like the revenge on we can say our favorite revenge maybe. My favorite revenge, who's almost a kill, is Miss Trunchbull, but I really love the scene with the glue on the hat and just how that plays out. Like the revenge on her parents is pretty fun, and I
Yeah.
think well deserved too.
Got it. Awesome.
I figured mine out before you actually said yours, Space.
Nice.
But for similar reasons, it is not a 10. Because Roald Dahl is Roald Dahl, and so there is only so much that we can actually separate him from his works. Um, and also, I love this movie. I love Mara Wilson. It's
Mhm.
just it was so fun to watch and to like the nostalgia, all of that stuff. So I also gave it a 9. Um, So I'm sorry, Susanna, because I know you worked hard to find a half of a Moby Dick book,
I
but
did. I worked really,
it's
really,
an even
really hard. Really
Well, you
it's
can
hard.
an
rate
even
yours a
nine.
half,
And it's
maybe.
an even nine probably because you found a half. You created a half. Um, and I was thinking about favorite kill, and I was like, favorite like kill is Miss Trunchbull's pride.
Ooh, there you go. That's a
Um,
good one.
and I think the moment of like her pride dies a few times. Let's
Mm-hmm.
just be real. The moment I think that the is like particularly iconic for me, it or like not iconic, but like brilliant, is so she is now she threw the girl with pigtails, and the girl with pigtails like had a bouquet. And I
Mm-hmm.
don't know if Matilda did it or not, right? Like that is one of the
Yeah.
very early things. We don't know if Matilda did it or if it just happened to be that way. But we know for sure the second time she throws a kid out the window, Matilda opens the window, gives the kid a lovely roller coaster ride, and brings the kid back in to push Miss Trunchbull over. And that piece I love.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Mm, okay. Well, um, I'm gonna go ahead and do an 8.5 because I
Nice.
want
See,
my
you're using
half.
your half.
So that you
Perfect.
can
I'm
use the
using my
hat.
half. Yeah, thank God for that half because it took me a while to figure out how to cut the book in half, and thus y'all will get your half because I was gonna go for 8 because I just can't get over the like anti-lesbianness, you know. Like it's
Yeah,
just
that's real.
it's a thing, and
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna go with the parents too because I think Pace made a really
Yeah,
good, very good point, and I'm gonna add the parents to that because
perfect.
definitely I wish she would have gone harder on them parents. But
I do too.
the anti-lesbian and the fat phobia, like at least the fat phobia had like an arc to it that came out positive, but like her, you know, like I would like to have a young motherly type who is a villain for once, you know, like I
Yeah.
appreciate those villains the best, you know. Because
Mm-hmm.
cisheads
Mm-hmm.
are
The
the real
cishet villain.
villains sometimes.
Like
They
in
really
Scarlet Witch,
are.
that's a good one. Speaking of
Yeah.
witches, and when we covered Doctor Strange too.
Okay.
So yeah, that's what I'm
Oh
gonna.
Yeah.
yeah, that's Scarlet Witch. Okay. Sorry.
Does it
It took me a minute.
pass the HNAC test?
Okay. There's so the I'm inclined to say no. I think the closest option that we get, the two options are basically the parents and Miss Trunchbull.
Mm-hmm.
And Miss Trunchbull like gets reverse bullied into giving up the
Yeah.
stuff. She doesn't actually willingly
Mm-hmm.
do all the giving up and stuff. Um, I don't think that the parents at all begin to redeem themselves because I think that the adoption is not them trying to do a kind thing for Matilda. It's them not doing a mean thing to Matilda because it gets Matilda out of their hair. I don't, it like,
Mm-hmm.
I know the narration paints it as like the only decent thing they ever did for her. And it is, but I don't think it's them trying to be decent. I think it's them being like, this would get her out of my hair. This would make her really happy, but also it would get her out of our hair.
I agree with both of your assessments, except for one character in particular. So, Miss Trunchbull, 100% agree. No active redeeming. the dad, 100% agree.
I knew it was going to be the mom.
The mom, I think, like there's a part where she apologizes at the end, and you can kind of see the way it's acted out. I really think that the actor is intending to show, I'm realizing I messed up. I'm sorry. This is what I'm going to try to do to leave you better. And then even like not as an excuse, but like even explain like I know I wasn't good at this and I recognize where that's coming from and I'm sorry. And so to me, that is not passing with flying colors because she's not sticking around to do any reparative harm. But she does apologize and do what's in Matilda's best interest in a way that I think at least the mom is doing as a way to try to say sorry and let me do what I can to repair, which is honestly give you somebody else because I know I'm not good at this and I've given you way too much trauma already. So that's the one caveat I would say is I do think the mom passes, but not with flying colors.
She's definitely the closest. Like she's the
Yeah.
only possibility.
Yeah, but I'm gonna go ahead and bust everybody's bubble and say that I feel like the mom. Okay, so like I think that the mom had to do that in order for there to be a consistent sexism throughout the whole thing.
Well, that's fair too.
Like
That a redeeming act is, yeah.
he couldn't have a mother not have a single motherly instinct. I mean, it comes with the ovaries, right? Like,
Hmm.
so we have to do something. I mean, she's got to at least have a
Yeah.
twinge, you know. So like, I would say no. I'd be like
Yeah. That's
X.
fair. I like it.
Yeah.
Do you have any jump scares?
No.
Okay. It is a pretty scary movie. Um, I say with sarcasm. Um, the next movie we'll cover is one of my favorite 80s slashers, which is My Bloody Valentine from 1981 to tie in with uh, Valentine's Day. And we are, in fact, covering the original, not the remake, maybe. But we have done a movie commentary on the remake way back in season two when Matt was my Patreon co-host and Emily was my main feed co-host. So you can go back and listen to that if you want to
No,
watch
in
the
season two, I
remake.
was not.
What?
I
No,
wasn't in
season three.
season two.
Sorry, season three. It was
Okay,
season
I was
three.
like, season two, I was not. Season three, yeah.
Yeah, season three. Emily was the co-host for Twilight and entire Vampire main feed season. But Patreon, I was still doing with Matt at that time, and then Emily took over on Patreon towards the end of that season. So, yeah. Uh, So, and also, I thought Practical Magic was next. I think I may have said that in a past recording, but it is not, in fact, because our schedule changed because we pushed stuff back. So, to keep Valentine's Day appropriate for My Bloody Valentine, that's what we're doing next. And I'm excited to show it to you. I think you'll have fun.
I'm excited for it. I'm
Um,
hoping that it is fun in a similar way to like Silent Night, Deadly Night and stuff. I've been
yeah,
It's a Wonderful Night. I
I think
really
there might be
liked
a
It's a
little bit
Wonderful
of that.
Night.
Yeah, it's a little bit, but not quite as much. But it's very much a golden age slasher. And well, probably closer to Silver Age. But
I don't know what that means, so you'll have to tell me when we get there.
I will say though that this I don't know. It we'll get there. We'll get there next episode. It's interesting. Valentine's Day is its own kind of horror, so we'll probably talk a little bit about that in the deep dive of like the history of who Valentine Saint Valentine actually was, because
Yeah,
that's a horror story in and of itself.
we used to watch that movie in Sunday school every year.
Oh, I didn't know there was a movie.
There's like,
Um,
I mean, ish.
yeah.
It's probably got a lot of legend in it.
Uh-huh.
Um, I don't know how
Yeah,
much
for
truth,
sure.
but yeah.
Yeah. Weird. It's weird all around. Um,
Mhm.
but that, I guess, is it for this episode. Our theme music was by Matt May, our super witchy tech magic, and intelligence magic too, since that's the magic in this movie, was Susanna Porter. Horror Nerds at
Mhm.
Church releases every seasonally with a live video every other Tuesday and then audio on your following podcast provider on Thursdays. Please comment, rate, subscribe to us on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your friends about us too, and know that we are doing like a full range, fun kids movies like this, but also a full-on slash like in 2 weeks from now. So there's something for everybody here. Uh, and if you can support us on Patreon, if you can't, just tell your friends, rate us, review us, subscribe, that stuff. But if you can support us on Patreon, get access to exclusive movie commentary episodes, BooTube episodes, more bonus content. Just go to patreon.com/horror nerds at church. It's only $5 to sign up. So more expensive than a library card, but
But
cheaper,
so is every.
right? But cheaper than the made-for-TV meals that that the Wormwoods consume every meal in front of their TV.
I mean, to be
Um,
fair, I grew up on some of those when my
yeah,
parents
yeah.
were
There's no
also
judgment about
cheaper than Audible,
yes.
right? More expensive
Hmm.
than the library, but cheaper than Audible.
True, true. And to be clear, as we said earlier, we are not part of Roald Dahl's whatever against TV and TV dinners. Those are morally neutral. Eat food,
Yes.
whatever is accessible for you and affordable.
That is
Uh,
best not just for babies, but for everyone.
yeah. Follow us on social media though, Facebook and Insta at Horror Nerds at Church, Blue Sky and Twitter at HNAC Um, yes, we're aware of how awful Meta is. We are leaving the podcast on there for now, but who knows what the future will be. Um, but that's where you'll get all of our news, other announcements, stuff like that. Also on Letterbox, you can I promise I will update our HNAC letterbox, but Emily and me are at least keeping our personal letterboxes pretty up to date. So follow us there.
Yep. I just updated Matilda tonight
I love it. I love
and the
it.
witches, but I forgot about that one.
Well, until next time, treat children like whole persons, and then maybe they won't develop supernatural powers to get revenge on you.
And share your chocolate with them.
Right?